when we first learn about Moshe in the beginning of Parshat Shemot, we don't use his name for the first 10 psukim from when he's born. He's born to Ish mi Beit Levi, Vaikach et Bat Levi, Vatar Aisha, Vateled Bein, and so on and so forth. He uses the word Ish and Yeled about 9 or 10 times before actually saying that his name was Moshe. We know that Yocheved followed him to the river to make sure that he was going to be okay and watched him. And also there, it just says Achoto, his sister. We don't mention his name anywhere. So I don't understand why that is. Why initially don't we just say that we're talking about Mosh Rabeinu? Further, before we know that Hashem spoke to Moshe and Hashem chose Moshe, we learn a little bit about him. We said, we know from his birth already that he was sent in the river and Bat Paro adopted him. And then he was raised by his actual mother Miriam, and he was raised at the beginning stage of his life by his actual family. And after that, it says he went and he was a daughter to Bat Paro. After which we know of 3 stories right before, which are immediately one after the other in the Parsha, right before Hashem spoke to Moshe. The first story is when Moshe saw a Mitzri beating his fellow Jew, and Moshe looked and he saw that no one was there, and he killed the Mitzri. And we see from here that Moshe had a sense of fraternity with his Jewish brothers, that he knew that he was really one of them. Even though he grew up in the house of Paro, he learned from his home, from Miriam, at the beginning stage of his life, that really he was a Jew, and he had to stick up for other Jews when people weren't being fair to them. After that, he then runs away because he's afraid for his life. And immediately we see the story of the Bnei Ruel, where they were Moshe was a shepherd, and they were shepherds, and they were trying to feed their flock, and the other shepherds were intimidating them, not letting them get to the well. So Moshe stood up for them, these girls that he didn't know, and he helped them give water to their flock. After that, Moshe gets to Har Sinai, and at Har Sinai, we all know the famous story. He sees the burning bush, and the pasuk says that Moshe saw it and he looked away. He knew that there was something different about it. So Rav Amnon Bazak explains that there's something interesting here that we see, that we have all these stories about Mosh Rabeinu, and they all have certain significance. Most of the time we know by Avram Avinu, for example, and by David HaMelech, before Hashem speaks to them, before really they have any significance, we don't know anything about them. We don't know about their life before Hashem actually spoke to them, before they had an actual tafkid. Whereas here, Moshe Rabeinu doesn't really have anything to do until Hashem speaks to him at Har Sinai. These stories don't really seem so significant. What does seem significant is it gives us an insight into who Mosh Rabeinu was and why Hashem chose Mosh Rabeinu to be the leader of Am Yisrael. And that's what's important here. And so why these 3 stories? What do we see from these 3 things? We see that again, Moshe was brought up in his mother's house, and he learned something from there. He learned that he was a Jew, and he learned that Jews had to stick up for other Jews. And when he saw something not right and not just, he did something about it. Then he grew up in Bat Paro's house. Now, what do we know about Bat Paro? Her father was trying to kill every single Jew. He was killing all the babies, essentially. He was throwing every baby into the river, and she saw a baby in the river, and she had compassion on this baby who was essentially the enemy her father was trying to kill, and she wanted to save him. So she was a type of person who had extreme compassion on everybody. Not just people who were her friends, but even her enemies, quote unquote. And Moshe learned that from her as well. Moshe learned to be compassionate, and we see that with Bnei Ruel. He just saw people weren't being treated fairly. He didn't know these people, and he saved them. He helped them out anyways. And then the third thing, he is living in Yitro's house, and we know that Yitro was Kohen Midian, that he was the priest there. Chazal teach us later on, after Yitro converts to Judaism, they say that Yitro tried every single kind of avodah zarah, and he saw nothing in them, and then afterwards he saw Hashem and he converted to Judaism. So Moshe also had learned something religious from Yitro, that when he was living in his house, he learned that to look deeper into things, and not everything is face value. And that's why when he saw the burning bush, the bush was burning and it wasn't being eaten up, he said there was something different about this, and he looked deeper into it. That's why he looked away. Then the pasuk says that only after he looked away, Vayahar Hashem ki sar li wrote that only after he looked away, then did Hashem speak to him. which implies that had Moshe not looked away, Hashem wouldn't have spoken to him. There might have been other shepherds who passed by and saw us, and they didn't think anything of it. But Moshe saw there was a deeper meaning to it. So that's what we learn about Mosh Rabeinu, that he not only did he learn all these things, but he learned from everyone. He learned from his mother, he learned from Paro, who he knew that, he knew he was a Jew, and he knew these people were oppressing the Jews, and he still learned something from them. And he took his compassion that he learned, and from everywhere he went, he was always learning something. And that's what we learn by these stories, which is why we have them here by Mosh Rabeinu, to teach us exactly who he was and how he became who he was. And that's also why I think that it doesn't use his name at the beginning of the Parsha. Because if you use his name, it'd be telling us this is a story of Mosh Rabeinu. This is Mosh Rabeinu, and he was the greatest leader there ever was, and he received the Torah from Hashem, and he's the person who could reach this level. But no, it doesn't use his name, because it's not necessarily just Mosh Rabeinu. It's any Yeled and any Ish, and anyone could become on this level, because anyone could just learn from every experience and use that to draw themselves closer to God.